Hey, my name is Andrew, and this is the story of the creativity advice that changed my life from this to this. Back in 2019, I was working as a freelance designer, and it was a weird time in my life because, on the one hand, I was making $150 an hour building websites, but on the other hand, I was broke because, like a lot of creative introverts, I was really bad at marketing myself. One day, I decided enough was enough and signed up for like 20 networking events. It was my worst nightmare, but the first time I went out, I happened to run into one of my college professors, Kathy Palikoff, and she introduced me to this creative director named Christina Capuzzo. So we hit it off, and she was like, hey, I'd love to see your portfolio sometime. Let's grab coffee. When I got home, I was in such a good mood because maybe this would lead to work or contacts or just some creative conversations. I turned on my computer, logged into Behance, and then everything fell apart. Design, coding, copywriting, illustration, music, half-finished personal projects, client work that never saw the light of day. My portfolio was a wasteland of inconsistency, and the worst part was there simply wasn't enough time to fix it before my meeting with Christina. I remember thinking like, how? How could I grind 12 hours a day for 3 years and still not have a niche or a style or a social media following or a general direction in life? I started going through my bookshelves looking for anything that might help, and that's when I saw it. The one thing. It was this book by Gary Keller that claimed any problem in life could be solved by ignoring all of the non-essentials and just focusing on one thing. Right next to it was the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, which talks about how you need 10,000 hours of practice to become an expert at something. Suddenly, I realized why I was so far behind as a creative despite all my hard work. I had 10,000 hours of practice, but they were spread out across like 20 different skills, which led me to the creativity advice that changed my life. Just do one thing every day for 365 days. Naturally, my next question was, but which thing? I had been here before trying to commit to something and failing because my creative skills were like kids. I love them all and I just couldn't choose between them. But this time was different because there was a deadline and a strong risk of humiliation if I didn't make up my mind. So I decided to pick the simplest thing in my portfolio: comics. It made sense because I've been drawing them ever since I got obsessed with Captain Underpants books as a kid, so I thought, screw it. I'm gonna draw 365 comics. The first week, I almost quit multiple times because coming up with a new comic every day was way harder than I thought it would be. But after week 2, I got into a rhythm and the ideas started to flow. On day 30, I added a yellow background to my comic, and then it hit me. This is my style. For the next week, I switched back and forth just to be sure, but somehow I knew I had reached a point of no return. I could either go back to my old life as a freelancer or take the yellow pill and see how far this creativity advice went. To prove I was serious, I sold my PlayStation and started spending twice as much time on my comics. 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, and 240 hours per month equaled 3,000 hours. In 1 year, I was going to be a third of my way to becoming an expert cartoonist. When I finally met up with Christina, I had forgotten all about my portfolio. My comics were my portfolio. We had like a 3-hour conversation about creativity, and it gave me the idea of turning my comics into a weekly series and writing a daily article for each topic. At first, it felt like I was cheating by doing more than just comics, but then I realized the point of the 365 challenge wasn't to throw away all my other skills. It was to focus them on one big idea so that everything I did kept me moving in one direction. In the morning, I'd draw, and then I'd illustrate the drawing, and then the illustration would inspire a blog post, and then the blog post would become a podcast episode, and all of it would go up on my personal website, which I used my design and coding skills to build. It was like my whole life was in orbit around comics. Halfway through March, the virus that shall not be named hit, and my local grocery store looked like a post-apocalyptic movie set. A week later, my part-time job shut down, and to top it all off, after posting daily comics for almost 5 months, I barely had 30 followers on Instagram. It was almost an impressive level of failure. On day 238, I happened to watch a YouTube video by Campbell Walker, aka Struthless, and it was like seeing a version of myself from an alternate universe. Here was this bald dude with a wacky sense of humor who had also decided to draw every day for a year, except he had hundreds of thousands of followers and his comics were so freaking funny and clever that I just felt like giving up on my challenge. As a last resort, I booked a coaching call with Chris Do, who's CEO of The Future and basically the Zen master of creative business advice. It was $1,000 for 1 hour, but I had to figure out why my comics were bombing or all my hard work was going to be for nothing again. At first, Chris was stumped.
The drawings are super attractive. They're like simple, they're bold, and then the words, it's just everything I like about an Instagram feed. And I'm like, what the freak? I thought I read it wrong. Like 40 followers? Like, what the hell?
But then he asked me what audience I was trying to reach, and I kind of knew, but I didn't know how to explain it clearly. So he said,
I think you need to find something that the community that you're looking for already describes themselves that way.
Later, we were talking about why I started drawing comics, and Chris said,
your biggest challenge is you have too many ideas, and then it's like, what do I do with all this stuff, yeah? So a little ADHD-ish.
When I heard that, my brain put 2 and 2 together, and it was like, that's my niche, creative ADHD. For the next week, I posted around that idea, and sure enough, my comics started taking off, but then disaster struck. In August, I drove to the Adirondacks for a mini vacation, but when I got there, I realized I forgot my drawing tablet. There was no Wi-Fi at the cabin, so I just decided to sketch my comics on paper, then illustrate and post them when I got home. A few days later, I went into town to check Instagram, and when I looked at my follower count, I had to read it twice. Before I got to the Adirondacks, I had 60 followers, and now I had more than 600. Chris Do had turned one of my comics into a guest post, and I couldn't let down the hundreds of people who were expecting to see daily comics, so I drove to Saratoga Springs, bought an iPad, and started illustrating. It took me almost 2 weeks of double posting, but on day 292, I finished 3 comics in 1 day to catch up. I was beginning to feel like a creative machine. The next day I was generating so many good ideas for comics that I made a stick figure drawing of myself dumping a giant load of pencils on an armed robber. Like, here you go, I've got a million more where those came from. It was at that point that I realized how much one little piece of creativity advice had changed my whole life. In less than a year, I had gone from feeling depressed and invisible to finding my style, building an audience, and doing something so big and so different that people finally knew me for something. I was the 365 comics guy. A few days later, I hit 300 comics, and by the end of September, I had doubled the 600 followers I got from Chris's guest post. I was killing it creatively, but there was a problem. I had no idea how any of this was gonna make money. On day 343, I did an Instagram live interview with a designer named Fabrice Po, and we talked about how I found my creative purpose in life by combining everything that made me, drawing, writing, rule breaking, into one word: lines.
Is there any process behind it, or is there something I can do right now?
Yeah, the way that I went about finding it was really, I started studying successful creative entrepreneurs, and every single one of them had this really special word. It was just one word that they owned and no one else in the world owned. I got so fired up talking about creativity and purpose that I started to plan a coaching business based around helping creative people find their one thing and do it every day for a year, just like I did with 365 Comics. On November 12th, I posted my last comic and changed my bio to say that I was a branding coach for creative rebels, which sounded great in theory, except for the awkward fact that despite all my fancy branding, I still hadn't made any actual money. By the time I finished my challenge, I was completely burned out, but I had to get the 365 book listed before Christmas. With a few storyline descriptions for context, the book ended up being 406 pages, and when I uploaded it to the publishing platform, I was dumbstruck. A single hardcover copy of my book cost $130. It was totally unsellable. For a couple weeks afterwards, I was so exhausted and depressed that I could barely get out of bed, but then through an extremely miraculous turn of events, I went from 30 to 1,000 subscribers on YouTube in 1 month, got monetized, and started making money more consistently than I ever did as a freelancer. that is a story for another video, but this story has a happy ending too, because once I recovered from creative burnout, I realized that my mistake in designing the book was painfully obvious. Having 4 comics per page instead of 1 took the cost of the hardcover down from $130 to $50. So that's it, the creativity advice that changed my life. If you like this video and you want to see all 365 comics, you can follow me on Instagram at fthelines, or you can click the link down below to buy the book in hardcover or softcover. Also, if you have a question or you want to suggest a future video topic around creativity or minimalism, let me know. As of October 2021, I'm still replying to every single one of my comments. So thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.